Sabrina is a 18-year-old high school student who lives with her parents and sister. She may still be in high school, but for a long time, she has felt as though it isn't for her anymore. She wants to travel and meet new people, especially boys. The problem is, she has no money to travel. She is always thinking of ways to earn money fast. Sabrina was willing to do anything for it. Just when Sabrina's hope starts to falter, an opportunity lands on her lap. One day, her older sister calls her. Sabrina's older sister used to be a babysitter, but she's stopped doing it because she's found a better job. Her older sister was asked to babysit the son of a new family that was new in town. This little boy was named Kenny. Sabrina's older sister couldn't do it anymore because of her new job, so she called up Sabrina. Sabrina was doubtful about accepting the job opportunity being offered to her. Sabrina was unsure whether the job would pay her enough money to fund her travel. Instead, she came up with a way to earn probably a lot more while she looked after little Kenny. What this idea was, Sabrina kept to herself. Before we continue on with Sabrina's story, let's first get to know Kenny's parents, Patrick and Sandy. Patrick and Sandy are a happy couple from North Dakota. They've been with each other for about 5 years now. Despite their work schedules, they try to spend as much time as possible with their 3-year-old son, Kenny. They were able to make this work thanks to their good friend who would sometimes look after Kenny. As soon as little Kenny turned 3 years old, Patrick and Sandy began to consider the idea of moving to a bigger house. They wanted to provide space for Kenny to grow up in, and their small apartment could not provide that. If they wanted to add another member into the family, a bigger house was something they needed. The problem was, little Kenny has a few special needs, and their current babysitter knew exactly how to deal with Kenny. Kenny is rather sensitive to meeting new people. He sometimes reacts poorly to meeting new people. The biggest contributing factor to the bond between Kenny and their current babysitter was the fact that she had known the family for quite some time already. Therefore, Kenny was used to seeing her around. The other trouble they faced with moving was the financial aspect of the situation. Even though both of them were working parents and made ends meet, they weren't too well off. A bigger house meant bigger expenses. They didn't see how they could pay for a bigger house in the city they lived in, so they decided to branch out and consider moving further away. Thankfully, Patrick gets an opportunity when he brings this issue up at work. Within about a month, they had purchased the house and were almost done moving in. It seemed as if things were falling into place for them. They felt happy starting this new chapter of their life. The problem was, who was going to take care of Kenny? She needed to find a babysitter fit for Kenny as soon as possible. They begin their task of finding a nanny by asking their neighbors for some recommendations. One of their neighbors used to have a nanny that they were very satisfied with, and the couple asked for her number. They call this nanny up and ask her to babysit for Kenny. Sadly, she declines because she now works a full-time job, but she does recommend her sister, Sabrina. Sandy was unsure, but the girl did have a lot of nice things to say about her. Sabrina did not have any experience babysitting kids with extra needs like Kenny. For Patrick and Sandy, this did not seem like the smartest choice. Despite their doubts, Patrick and Sandy call Sabrina up. She perks up and seems to be interested in taking the job. She reasons that she adores kids and also needs the money. Sabrina sounds like a nice person, so the couple invite her over to discuss the job. It goes over really well, and Patrick and Sandy start feeling hopeful. On Sabrina's first day, Sandy is present, but afterwards, Sabrina is left alone with Kenny. The first 2 weeks go by with no trouble whatsoever. Soon enough, Kenny has adjusted well to Sabrina, and they get along well. After Sabrina's first 2 weeks on the job, the couple start noticing some strange things. Sandy and Patrick began to observe an increasing number of items being misplaced or completely disappearing from their home. Some of the things they noticed disappeared are bottles of wine, cans of food, a cheap handbag, and some money. Sandy blames Patrick for this because he has often misplaced or lost items before. Patrick doesn't think he's responsible for the missing or misplaced items, but he is rather unsure because of his past. Instead, he comes up with a plan that will prove he is not the culprit behind these strange things. This plan was either going to prove he is innocent, or it will just be something he will eventually forget about. What Patrick didn't know is that this plan of his would be the key to something important. Peter decides to carry out his plan without telling anybody. He does not tell Sandy about this plan of his for fear that she might not agree to this and think he was crazy for even thinking of doing it. Once the hidden cameras arrives, he installs them and places them in hidden corners of the house where the items supposedly went missing. One day, Sabrina suddenly quits the babysitting job. She reasons that the babysitting was starting to get in the way of school. Patrick was worried that Sabrina may have discovered the cameras, but he was too afraid to ask her about it for fear that Sandy might find out. Now that Sabrina quit, they once again face the problem of finding a nanny ASAP. Sandy just started her new job, so she couldn't drop everything in the blink of an eye. She scoured the internet for help. Luckily, through Sandy's determination, she managed to find a website that offered professional nannies. They did cost a lot more than Sabrina. But seeing that she didn't really have a lot of options left, she hired the nanny. For a while, everything seemed to be going great. The new nanny was good, and she and Kenny were getting along okay too. Nothing went missing in the following weeks too. Patrick eventually forgets about the hidden cameras. Since installing the cameras, he has never reviewed any footage whatsoever. Ever since the move, Patrick and Sandy haven't gone out to dinner on their own. They were too caught up with the move and adjusting to their new life to even think about going out for a fancy dinner date. When they finally decide to go somewhere fancy for dinner, Sandy considers wearing some of her prettiest jewelry pieces. She was in for a surprise when she opens the box and discovers some of the pieces have disappeared. They initially suspected that it was the nanny who stole the jewelry. However, it was hard to prove this suspicion due to lack of evidence. Suddenly, Patrick remembers the hidden cameras he installed a few weeks back. Patrick comes clean and lets Sandy know about the cameras. She was upset at what Patrick did, but she soon realized this is a good opportunity for them to gather some evidence to support their suspicions. Finally, she agrees to reviewing the recorded footage. However, as they looked at the footage, they were unsuccessful in finding evidence to suggest it was the new nanny who did it. Finally, they get to the footage taken on Sabrina's last day at work. They think nothing of it at first, but become surprised when they discover what happened during Sabrina's last day of babysitting for Kenny. One of the cameras managed to get Sabrina in the shot. It first started with Sabrina just looking around the house, but eventually they see her walking around with a jewelry box in her hand. What was she doing? They review the other cameras and see her trying all of the jewelry on. She particularly picked the prettiest looking jewelry pieces. Suddenly, it was starting to make a whole lot of sense for Patrick and Sandy. Patrick and Sandy are outraged at this shocking discovery and notify the police right away. It doesn't take too long for the police to get a hold of Sabrina's parents and bring Sabrina in for questioning. Patrick and Sandy go to the police station so they can face her and ask her some questions. Unfortunately, Sabrina had already sold the jewelry and was thinking of using the money she made to fund her trip overseas as soon as she graduated from high school. The good thing was, she had not spent any of the money yet. Sandy was especially disappointed upon hearing this, but the police assure her they would do their best to track down the jewelry and return it to Sandy. Luckily, the police did keep their word and managed to find the jewelry. The jewelry pieces were now safely back in Sandy's hands. Sabrina claims she is sorry for what she did to Sandy and Patrick. When her parents come to pick her up, they admit that this wasn't Sabrina's first stunt. Even with this knowledge, Patrick and Sandy don't press charges against her. Sabrina is still young, and they didn't want to be responsible for giving her a record. They trust that her parents will do whatever they can to prevent this situation from ever happening again. Anyway, they were just happy to get the jewelry back. Plus, there was no denying that Sabrina was actually good with Kenny.